the same building as one of the grandchildren's
Good morning.
Good morning.
Our centering thought is from Richard Wright's book, The Native Son. They hate because they fear, and they fear because they feel that the deepest feelings of their life are being assaulted and outraged. And they do not know why. They are powerless pawns in a blind play of social forces.
Good morning. Good morning. Hello, and welcome to the First Church and Parish in Dedham. We gather in this space, which was the homeland for Native people, usurped by the Puritans who built this church. We wish to acknowledge the loss of land by those indigenous peoples who live and breathe in the Mashpee Wampanoag territories by holding a moment of silence before we begin. Whoever you are, wherever you come from, and wherever you are on your journey in life, we welcome you to this place. My name is Gail Meyer Curley. I use she, her pronouns, and I've been a member of First Church since 2007. I'm a part of the Religious Education Committee. I facilitate the coolies, I'm a member of the Civic Engagement Committee. I help to organize our monthly crafting group, and I'm one of the administrators on our Facebook group. If you are visiting us for the first time, we hope you will sign our guest book out in the vestibule of this building and get a welcome packet from our usher, who today is Eileen Sullivan. After service today, a social hour will occur in the Parish House dining room. Everyone is invited to stay and visit with one another. Please note that we are now locking the doors to the Parish House during service to increase the safety of our buildings. If you need to access the Parish House building during service, please see the usher so that they can let you into that building. Again, that usher is Eileen Sullivan. Saturday, February 17th, First Church will be working at the Dedham Food Pantry. We will also be working there in April. Both sign-ups are on the bulletin board in the Parish House. Please consider signing up for one of these dates, or both. I just posted this on the Facebook group, and when I checked, we need one more person for Saturday the 17th, and 2 more people for the date in April that is escaping me right now. But it is on the bulletin board, and it's also, we have a sign-up genius that we're using as well online. If you have any questions about this, please see Howard Ostroff at Coffee Hour. Okay, so don't see Howard, you can see Rali or me, and we also have more information on them as well. All Sundays in the month of February at 2 p.m., we will view films that explore issues of immigration. Join us for popcorn, film, and discussion at the 8th Annual Justice Documentary Matinee Series. This event is free and open to the public. This Sunday, we will watch a double feature. Out of many, one, The Immigrant Story, and the film Human Flow. A description of the films are on our website in our January/February Parish record and are also on the bulletin board in the Parish House. The next Friday, the folk music coffee house will be on February the 16th, next Friday, in the auditorium of the Parish House. The Cook Family Singers will be performing. Tickets are $15 each and are available on our website or at the door the night of the concert. I'd also like to say who's serving us today, as I mentioned before, our usher is Eileen Sullivan. Our worship associate is Eric Meyer-Curley. And coffee hour was Team 2, who's facilitated by Jeff Hengel and Howard. And our gorgeous flowers today are to celebrate the longtime friendship of Joan Kozlowski and Marianne Osborne, and they're from Andrew Gilmore. Please read all the announcements in your order of worship. And we will now begin our morning worship.
I'm insulted, I should say, in case you haven't heard. But I went here today because, as many of you know, I ran the Early Childhood Special Needs Program in Newton for nearly 20 years. And I'm so grateful that the strike is over, but I want to acknowledge my gratification today for the paraprofessionals that were included in the strike and who received, I'm not quite sure how much of a raise, but they received some portion of the raise. And the programs, especially these programs, could not function without these paraprofessionals. They are valuable members of the staff, and they work closely with the kids every single day. So I'm ready the challenge in honor of them. I agree with the challenge as usual for our sustainability in this community.
Our opening words this morning are from this book, Haiku by Richard Wright. Towards the end of his life, in the last 18 months, he wrote thousands, almost 20,000 haikus. And I just picked 4 to read to you today. If you're not familiar with haiku, it's a Japanese form of poetry that uses syllables to, I bet some of you kids have had to write haikus in school, uses syllables to define the structure of haiku. Angela is a big haiku writer. The melting snowflakes are wetter than the brown horse's back, darker than his flanks. Come out of the cold, a light window beckons through falling snow. Black men with big brooms sweeping streets in falling snow are absorbed by flakes. The cold is so sharp, the shadow of the house bites into the snow. Now I invite you to sing with me 318 in your gray hymnal, 318, We Would Be One. Actually, before I do that, I want to add that it's very nice to see Joan Wislocki and Marianne Osborne here, and also Anna Wislocki. So can we just give them a round of applause? We would be one. God. You may be seated. An offering to support and sustain the ministries of this church will now be given and gratefully received. Now I'd like to invite the children forward for our intergenerational message. Or at least so you can see the pictures. He goes into the first one. I figure we be our long day today. We'll start by bringing the sound to our hearts and our minds and our spirits so we can open our listening ears. CJ can't hear it, so nobody can hear it. PJ, why do I do that? I know you're PJ. Peter James, right? Yeah, I know that in my head. I'm dyslexic, so sometimes I mix things up. Anybody else in here is dyslexic? No, they're dyslexic? See things backwards and listen to things backwards? There are a few people I know. So today I want to read you a book called Richard Wright and the Library Card. How many of you go to the library? Any of you go to the library and you get to check out books and take them home? Yeah. Do you like going to the library? Yeah. It's kind of neat. Well, this is a story about somebody who couldn't go to the library. Wouldn't that be a terrible thing not to be able to go to the library? Richard lived in the South. Richard loved the sound of words. He loved the stories. His mother told about the farm where she grew up. There was a willow tree by the bend in the river. She said, I dreamed all day my girl dreams down there. Richard loved to hear his grandfather tell about the war. He ran away from his master and fought the rebel army. I was only a boy, his grandfather said proudly, but I fought as well as any man. I fought in the rain and the mud. I carried the flag at the head of the troops. So we love stories. Do you love stories? Do you like to hear stories that people tell? Yeah. Well, Richard longed to read stories on his own, but his family was poor, and they moved often, looking for work in different towns and cities. His father cleaned office buildings, and his mother cooked in the kitchens of wealthy white people Richard had little chance to go to school, and his mother taught him at home what she could by reading the funny papers out loud and sounding out each word carefully. Do you like to read cartoons and funny papers? Yeah. So that's one way to learn to read, right? Is by reading cartoons. When Richard finally learned to read, he couldn't buy a book or borrow a book. And he wanted to so badly. Books were expensive, and the doors of the library were shut against him because he was black. So Richard read whatever he could find, old newspapers, books without covers pulled from trash cans. When Richard was 17, he caught a bus to Memphis. He hoped to find work, enough to earn money to move to Chicago, where he would make a new life for himself in a new world. Richard walked the hot streets looking for a job. Would he be, I have to read it now backwards. Richard walked the hot streets looking for a job that would be his ticket to freedom. He saw many young men like himself searching for the same job in the same way. He finally found a piece of work at the optician's office. He polished eyeglasses and scrubbed the floors. And he ran errands for the white men. As long as he kept his head down, and as long as he began every sentence with "Sir," Richard was safe. At night, Richard returned to the boarding house where he had rented a room to save money. He ate beans from a pan, warmed by the water from a tap. Listening to the noise of the street below, Richard felt a familiar hunger for words. But only white people could get a card at the library and could take them out. But Richard had an idea of work. He looked around the office trying to find one man who might understand his hunger for books. What do you think he did? You think he found what? He asked someone to get him books. For the most part, they were like so many white men he'd known before. They would never understand a black boy who wanted a library card, a black boy who wanted to read books. Even they didn't read. Only one man seemed different. And the other men ignored him as they ignored Richard. Several times Richard had been sent to the library to check out books for him. One day, when the other men were out to lunch, and Jim was eating lunch alone at his desk, Richard approached him. "I need your help," Richard said. "Are you in some kind of trouble?" Jim asked. "I want to read books. I want to use the library, but I can't get a card," Richard said. But Jim would not laugh in his face. "What do you want to read?" Jim asked, cautiously. "Novels, plays, history?" What do you think he wanted to read? Stories. Richard felt confused. His mind was racing so fast he couldn't think of a single book. Jim said nothing. He reached into his desk and brought up a worn white card and handed it to Richard. "I'll write a note," Richard said. "Like the ones you wrote when I got books for you?" "All right," Jim said nervously, "but don't tell anyone else. I don't want you to get into trouble." "No, sir," Richard promised. "I'll be careful." After work, Richard walked through the crowded streets to the library. He felt as if he were on a train to Chicago, as if he were already traveling north to safety. But when Richard walked through the door, he felt the old fear again. Many sight of a black boy in the library. Richard kept his eyes down, not looking up, and he stood before the checkout desk. The librarian put on her glasses to make sure he hadn't written a note. Why can't Mr. Falk get his own books? She asked. He's very busy, Richard replied, his legs trembling. All right, the woman said, but you tell Mr. Falk I'd rather see him in person next time. Richard roamed the stacks, unable to believe there was this many books in the world. He touched the leather spines and fingered the pages he dreamed about for such a long time. Are you sure these books aren't for you? The librarian asked in a loud voice at checkout time. Once again, heads turned. Richard felt the eyes of the wide people on him. He thought he'd been caught, that he would never be able to read the books he wanted so badly. But Richard told the lady what she wanted to hear, what she believed was true about all black boys like him. No, ma'am, he said, these books aren't for me. Heck, I can't even read. The librarian laughed out loud and stamped his books. Richard heard other people laugh as he walked out of the library. That night in his room, Richard read all until the sun dimmed the electric light. He read all the words of Dickens, Tolstoy, Stephen Crane. He read all about people who suffered and had even though their skin was white, they longed for the same freedom that Richard had spent his life trying to find. With the light of the sun coming through the window, Richard put down the book. He slept. He felt sleepy, but the words he had read echoed in his ears, colored everything he saw. He wondered if he would act differently, if others would see how the books had changed him. Richard knew he would never be the same again. You know, books can change you. They can make you think different thoughts, right? They can help you see the world in a different way, the way somebody else might see it. And it's important for everybody to have a right to read a book, right? Everybody to have that chance. And it's something we should never, ever, ever think is not a gift that we can read books. Do you know something else that's important to know? The very first public library in the United States was in the minister's house here at First Church and Parish in Dedham. Can you believe that? That was the first place people could check out books for free in the U.S. All right, we'll now sing you to your classes. Now let us enter into a time of prayer and meditation as is your practice. We begin by breathing in peace, and breathing out love. Breathing in peace, and breathing out love.
bigger, and leaned weakly against the door. Mr. Max, I know the folks who sent you to die hated me. I know that. But you reckon it was like me, trying to get something like I was. And when I'm dead and gone, they'll be saying, like I'm saying now, that they didn't mean to hurt nobody. That they was trying to get something too. Max did not answer. Peter saw the look of indecision and wonder come into the old man's eyes. Tell me, Mr. Max, you think they was? Peter, Max pleaded. Tell me, Mr. Max. Max shook his head and mumbled. You're asking me to say things I don't want to say, but I want to know. You're going to die, Peter. Max's voice faded. Peter knew that the old man had not wanted to say that. He had said it because he had pushed and made him say it. They were silent for a moment longer. Then Peter whispered, That's why I want to know. I reckon it's because I know I'm going to die that makes me want to know. Max's face was ashy. Peter feared that he was going to leave. Across the gulf of silence, they looked at each other. Max sighed. Come here, Peter, he said. He followed Max to the window and saw in the distance the tips of some church buildings in the lead. See all those buildings, Peter? Max asked, placing an arm around Peter's shoulders. He spoke hurriedly, as though trying to mold a substance which was warm and quiet, which might soon cool. Yeah, I see them. You lived in one of them once, Peter. They're made out of steel and stone, but the steel and stone don't hold together. Do you know what holds those buildings together, Peter? You know what keeps them in their place? Keeps them from tumbling down? Peter looked at him bewildered. It's the belief of men. If men stop believing, stop having faith, they come tumbling down. Those buildings sprang up are the hearts of men later, men like you. Men keep hungry, keep needing, and those buildings keep growing and unfolding. You once told me that you wanted to do a lot of things. Well, that's the feeling that keeps those buildings in their places. You mean you talking about what I said that night when I said I wanted to do a lot of things? Peter's voice became quiet, childlike in its tone of hungry wonder. Yes, what you felt, what you wanted, is what keeps those buildings standing there. When millions of men are desiring and longing, those buildings grow and unfold. But, Peter, those buildings aren't growing anymore. A few men are squeezing those buildings tightly in their hands. Those buildings can't unfold, can't feed the dreams of men have, men like you. The men on the inside of those buildings have begun to doubt, just as you did. They don't believe anymore. They don't feel it's their world. They're restless, like you, Peter. They go in the streets and stand outside of those buildings and look and wonder. But what they hate me for, Peter asked. The men in those buildings are afraid. They want to keep what they own, even if it makes others suffer. In order to keep it, they push men down in the mud and tell them they are beasts. That men like you get angry and fight to re-enter those buildings, to live again. Bigger, you killed. That was wrong. That was not the way to do it. It's too late for you. Work with others who are trying to believe and make the world live again. But it's not too late to believe what you felt, to understand what you felt. Peter was gazing in the direction of the buildings, but he did not see them. He was trying to react to the picture. Max was trying to compare that picture to what he had felt all his life. I just wanted to do something, Peter mumbled. reading comes from The Unfinished Quest of Richard Wright by Rali Weaver. Because of personal difficulties due to the poverty of his family, the severity of his grandmother's religion, and the repressive racism of the South, Wright stands out as one of American writers whose vocation was the most surprising and whose professional success and spiritual growth the most dearly won. His achievement was therefore viewed as exemplary by many blacks who planned on making writing their career. Historically, however, Wright appears to be more than a prototype of black literary achievement in the United States. Indeed, no American novelist before him wrote about urbanization with as much depth and force. Admittedly, the problems of the ghetto are linked to the exploitation and racial oppression of the blacks, but the reactions of a writer obviously transcend the color of his skin and the particular circumstances of his youth and background. Thus, Wright's first novels, and in particular, Native Son, soon became a point of departure for a certain number of authors who sought to explore violence, poverty, and alienation of the urban setting. The ghetto, however, represented only one stage of Wright's quest as a humanistic novelist. His past through life symbolized the individual's struggle with his environment, and he refused to either admit defeat or to play the game. His environment was, of course, first limited to Jackson and then the Chicago South Side, but later expanded to New York, where society placed its favorite black writer of the day on the appropriate pedestal. France, which expected a set pattern of behavior from its intellectuals, and finally, the West as a whole, which mobilized them in defense of its culture and ideology. Wright's life and his writing, to a lesser degree, betrayed an incessant desire for expansion and growth. One after another, the anchor lines of his thoughts were in a transcontinental and intercontinental journey toward ever-widening horizons. This quest for humanity made the American citizen by birth, the ordinary citizen of Paris, into a citizen of the world by virtue of his innermost calling.
I invite you to join with me in singing hymn number 125 in your great hymnal, hymn number 125 from the Prussian Wealth of Power. Wright in high school and in college, yet reading Native Son again recently for this sermon left me aching as much as the first time I read him. Wright's description of the systemic racism that led Bigger to cover up the fear-driven murder is as poetic as it is poignant. As Wright's words in our centering thought point out, hate and fear drive all four types of racism: internalized racism, institutional racism, structural racism, and interpersonal racism. Hate and fear are intertwined and born from a sense of superiority and impetus. And superiority is often driven by hate, but the hate is driven by insecurity. Richard Wright's first novel, Native Son, explores all these types of racism. Living in the south side of Chicago, the book's protagonist, Bigger Thomas, navigates deeply entrenched forms of racism. For example, the character Bigger has absorbed the false belief that as a black man, he is inherently inferior and destined to fail. This is internalized racism. Having grown up in the South, I grew up under institutionalized sexism and grew up thinking women were less than men for more than half my life, that I wasn't worthy unless I had a man, but also I wasn't worthy of, I wasn't equal to a man. And that's exactly what happens to people who are victims of internalized racism. Internalized racism manifests in low self-esteem, feelings of powerlessness, and eventual acceptance of what seems to be a predetermined fate. Interpersonal racism is evident in the novel's interactions between Bigger and the white characters. Bigger faces constant prejudice and discrimination and dehumanization from Mr. Dalton, Peggy, and Mary Dalton, who perpetuate stereotypes, express overt and subtle forms of bigotry, and treat Bigger as a threat solely because of his skin color. The institutionalized racism in Native Son is depicted through the systemic barriers that limit opportunities for black people. The housing project Bigger lives in is full of rats and roaches. The institutionalized racism within the criminal justice system, education, housing, and employment. Sectors shape Bigger's life, and he's denied access to quality education, meaningful employment, and fair legal representation due to the systemic biases against black individuals. Structural racism refers to the overarching societal structures that perpetuate racial inequalities, and in Native Son, structural racism is deeply ingrained in the social, economic, and political systems of the 1930s Chicago ghetto. These systems were in place to uphold white supremacy and maintain the status quo, resulting in the marginalization and oppression of black communities. Bigger's experiences serve as a stark illustration of how these structural inequalities shape his life's trajectory and limit his opportunities for advancement. Throughout Native Son, Richard Wright masterfully portrays the insidious nature of racism in all its many forms, highlighting how it permeates every aspect of Bigger Thomas's life and ultimately leads to his tragic demise, which is why it's so sad. Native Son was written in 1940. In today's world, racism persists in all its insidious forms. It still permeates every aspect of and facet of society and impacts the lives of individuals in marginalized racial groups. When Jenny and I were on sabbatical last year, we visited the National Museum for African American history and culture in Washington, D.C. It's a free museum and open to the public, and I, for one, am glad my tax dollars help pay for free museums. Much different than the public libraries that Richard Wright tried to enter when he was a child. The National Museum of African History and Culture is set up much like the Guggenheim Museum, and it has a spiral ramp that goes up many floors, starting at the bottom with the stories of black-skinned people from their origins, through enslavement, through the Civil War, through the Civil Rights Movement, and on and on. And in the top floors, they celebrate all the arts and the culture of musicians and writers and artists, both through the centuries of enslavement and into the present day. For most of my ministry in Dedham, I have wanted to share the historical importance of Black voices, especially during Black History Month, because so many have been silenced and left out of our history books. Even as late as 1980s, in some towns, the South denied Black citizens library cards. And I know this because my aunt's girlfriend was a librarian in Driftwood, Texas, and she lost her job was fired because she was handing out library cards to Black people in the year, just wait for it, 1989. Institutional racism operates within systems and institutions leading to unequal access to opportunities for marginalized groups, such as when someone can't get a marriage license or a library card because of the color of their skin, or doesn't give people health care because of the color of their skin. We all know that racial profiling in law enforcement disproportionately targets people of color, subjecting them to higher scrutiny and more arrests and more incarceration. Moreover, disparities in education and employment and housing, healthcare, and criminal justice system further entrench systemic inequalities, perpetuating cycles of poverty and marginalization. I'm part of the Chickering Foundation. We give money to groups that are helping women get out, who are getting out of prison. And in Massachusetts, they're trying to build a multi-million-dollar prison for women. And many people feel that incarcerating women is absolutely a mistake because you separate them from their children, and many of them are caring for their elders. It's a insidious problem, and of course we're seeing like a much higher incidence of women of color being imprisoned. Systemic racism encompasses broader societal structures and policies that perpetuate racial disparities. Mass incarceration, for example, disproportionately affects communities of color, with African Americans facing higher rates of imprisonment for similar offenses compared to their white counterparts. And women are, if you think men are treated bad in prison, women have fewer programs and are treated even worse. Additionally, environmental racism exposes minority communities to disproportionate levels of pollution, environmental hazards, reflecting the intersection of race and environmental justice. Institutionalized racism is when a person adopts cultural and media portrayals, perpetuating harmful stereotypes and erasing the artistic contributions of marginalized groups. Through art and literature, Richard Wright outlined his struggles growing up in the South, a child of parents who had been enslaved and who had struggled to hold on to the land the government had gifted them during the Restoration after the Civil War. Wright's voice is relevant today because we are only empowered to achieve the American dream once we are all empowered to achieve the American dream. If you haven't already read it, I encourage you to read Native Son and Black Boy by Richard Wright. And we can do more, though, than just read. We can keep examining the racism that's prevalent in our American culture and stand up in opposition to all systems of oppression in every form, especially mass incarceration, until all people are free from hate and harm and disregard of any kind. Let us be the ones that act not from fear, but from love in all times, to all people. To offer kindness everywhere we go and live with peace in our hearts. Amen.